Did she not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a continuation of our interview of prominent persons in the Pacific Northwest, and today we're continuing our interview of Frank Cunningham, long associated with rowing and many other activities here in the Pacific Northwest. Frank, we're seated down here on the shore of Green Lake, and it's a great occasion for rowing, and maybe we might start out by just telling us what's going on down here today, September 15th, 1986.
Well, it's the meeting of the masters in rowing, all those people active in rowing who are over 27.
From 27 up to how high?
I think there's a man 76, 78 racing.
Yes,
today.
I think I've talked to at least two 76-year-olds who are racing, and
there's a coxswain, I think, a coxswain coach who's 88.
Yes. Well, that's a pretty good spread. 27 being, why did they select age 27 as a start?
Well, it seems like an arbitrary figure, but it advances the age beyond college participation. The college graduate would be 21. That gives you 5 or 6 years to get out of shape and get into something else.
Or to finish their graduate careers and get started wherever they are.
Yeah, most people of the age 21, 27 are in transition. They're getting ready to do something, and so I think perhaps it was just one of those committee decisions, and everybody seems satisfied with it. It's a meaningless term. Masters doesn't describe anything. That doesn't mean that all masters out there, in terms
I
of
was told it just meant that they were older.
All it means is they're older. Yeah, just older.
Your cap says USA Rowing or U.S. Rowing Association. Are they the sponsoring organization?
Well, it's under the aegis of the yeah, that's right.
And how many clubs and rowers are participating approximately?
I haven't a clue. I don't know. I'd say there must be 300 or 400 participants, it would seem, at least.
Well, there appear to be
clubs.
Participants from Philadelphia, Boston, Florida, Indianapolis, which seems like a sort of the dry Middle West, and a lot from California, and of course a lot from this area.
I bet there are 40, 50 organizations. Hard to say. You asked the wrong man.
Well, let's go back for a few minutes first to pick up some of your personal history. Where were you born and brought up?
I was born and raised in Lowell, Massachusetts, 1922. I lived there for about 25 years.
That was then at least somewhat of a textile town, was it not?
Yeah,
Textile manufacturing?
Yes.
And did you go to private or public schools in that area?
I went through 9th grade in public schools near home, and then left in 35 to go to prep school, boarding school, Noble and Greenough in Dedham, not very far away, as a boarding student. Prepared there for Harvard. Got into Harvard in 1940.
Had your father or any of your family been interested in rowing in the earlier years?
Well, as a small boy, I was introduced to boats and rowing in regular fixed-seat boats. So in the summers, I would row in those. And in fact, I suppose it was not until I was a teenager, perhaps 14, 15 years old, that I even thought about rowing in the racing boats. And then I began to discover that there were people in my family who had rowed. An uncle, my father's brother, rowed on the law school crew, and then my father's uncle rowed in a class crew all through college, but there were no varsity oarsmen in the family that I ever heard of.
And your early rowing as a teenager was where, on the lakes of New England?
No, I rowed on the Charles River, on the
River.
upper reaches of the Charles as it passes through Dedham, and rowed there in fours.
So you were rowing at Noble and Greenough, the prep school you went to?
Yeah.
That was a boys' school?
Boys' school, all boys.
And did their crew race with other prep schools in the area?
I think we rowed against perhaps 5 or 6 other crews. Middlesex, Groton, Brooks, St. George's, Exeter, I think, on occasion. I don't think we ever raced St. Paul's. I think the Groton race is the last race of the year. It's a very small league.
Rowing had a fairly long tradition in those private boys' schools in New England, did it not?
Well, yes. I don't know how far back the rowing tradition went. In the case of Noble and Greenough, the school moved from Boston in 1922 onto an estate which gave them access to Motley's Pond, and a very good opportunity to row. So they built, I think they built the boathouse before they built the gym. They were using an old horse barn for the gymnasium, and built the boathouse the year they arrived. The year I came, they were just completing an addition to the gymnasium to make it a proper gymnasium. So I thought that gives you an idea of their priorities.
Did you participate in other sports at Noble and Greenhill beside rowing?
Well, I started to participate in football, and never did very well in it. And of course, rowing was a spring sport. Immediately when I got into rowing, I discovered that I had some athletic ability, and that it didn't matter that I wasn't going to be a good football player. And I hurt my back the second year I was there in a skiing accident, and so I was shut out from first boat or even second boat competition for the rest of my time. So I was a kind of a red shirt, I guess you'd say, for all the time I was in school. So I was too crippled up to do any of the other sports anyway, and I got back into rowing in my senior year. I was out for a year and a half and I couldn't do anything. And then I got back in my senior year and I rowed third boat.
Where'd you go to college?
Then I went to Harvard.
They're just celebrating their 350th anniversary this year, I believe.
Yes.
What persuaded you or led to your going to Harvard?
Well, I was one of those boys who went there because everybody in his family had uncles, cousins, father, grandfather, great-grandfather. I think I would have been the fifth, maybe the sixth generation of my family to go there. And when the question came up about college choice...
Did you have any choice under those circumstances?
I never exercised a choice, and I don't think it was ever put to me as a choice. I was being prepared for Harvard.
So what year did you enter Harvard then?
So I entered in 1940.
1940. The war in Europe had just started, of course, in 1939.
Yeah.
And so did you turn out for rowing immediately at Harvard?
Well, I'd been advised by a teacher at Noble's to turn out for fall rowing when I suggested to him that I might turn out for football. And at 148 pounds, this was kind of a laugher. And
you weren't exactly heavy enough for football.
No, I didn't know how to play the game, and I wasn't heavy enough in the second place. And he was very kind and quick to see that although I might have something to prove, that I might have to turn out for football to prove. He thought, well, why don't we just head him off in the right direction and be done with it? He told me that there was fall rowing, knowing that I was good in rowing, and I was clearly good. I was beginning to believe that I could be a good athlete as a rower, but in nothing else. So I started out rowing with the lightweights right off when I got to college.
That would have been the fall of 1940 or fall of 41?
Fall of 40. Because we had an initial period of time as beginners in the barge, and then we were sorted out, and then we spent the rest of the fall.
Harvard had and has a long tradition in rowing, does it not?
Oh, yes.
Going back well into the last century, I guess. I don't know.
Well, they were celebrating, what was it, 1952, I think they were celebrating 100 years of the Harvard-Yale. They went back a few years earlier than that. I can't be sure, but yeah, pretty well established.
Were you, in the fall of 40, then able to get on what would have been the freshman Harvard crew?
Well, I rowed lightweight.
Or lightweight?
Yeah, I was on the freshman lightweight first boat, and then I was on the varsity squad the next year as a lightweight, rowed again as a JV.
How did they distinguish qualification for the lightweight crew?
Well, in those days, the lightweight crew was 150-pound average, with 5 pounds allowed for the heavy man. And
I see a few could be over that.
Yes. Well, no more than the 5 pounds. And so if you had a couple of heavy men, you had to have a lot of people under 145 or so to make up. Sometimes the bowman might be a 140-pounder to make up for a couple of heavy men in the waist. I took the most weight of anybody in my boat. I was rowing stroke.
How did you happen to become stroke on the lightweight crew?
When I began rowing at Noble's, when I think back, I don't know how it was that I came to be rowing stroke, but I don't remember not rowing stroke. I can't remember a day when I didn't row stroke. So the choice was made by my coaches at school very, very early on. Partly, I suppose, on the basis of the way I handle an oar, because I'd done a lot of rowing as a kid, and I was comfortable with an oar in my hands, and so they thought, well, we'll put the one who seems the most dexterous in the stroke position, and the others will follow him. But then, of course, to be a stroke, you have to have rhythm and a certain sense of what's going on in the boat, and I was one of those lucky people. I got the job before I was qualified to fill it, and then I learned how to be a stroke.
You learned on the job.
Learned on the job, and then when I got to Harvard, the same thing happened again. I rowed perhaps one day on the starboard side, maybe rowed 3 days at any position other than stroke, and I was a stroke again. So there was a week in my whole career when I did not row stroke.
Who was coaching the Harvard crew in 1940?
Well, the head coach was Tom Bowles, and he was coach of heavyweights.
Was he a University of Washington graduate?
University of Washington graduate who had been the freshman coach and a very successful one here at the university under Al Oberkson. And then the other coach who came with Tom to Harvard was Harvey Love, and he coached the freshman heavyweights. And then Bert Haynes, a man who came over in perhaps 1919 or just after the war from England, I think had earlier done some varsity coaching or freshman coaching, and then he was the lightweight coach, and he coached freshman and varsity lightweight. So I was under his tutelage for the 2 years I rowed as a lightweight. So those are the three coaches we had.
Yeah, during those first years there from 1940 on, did you get onto the heavy boat, the varsity?
I rowed in 43, well, in 42, at the end of the lightweight season. I finished my last race, and the next day, the lightweight coach told me that they wanted a spare stroke to row in the Harvard-Yale race, which is going to take place at Derby that year, in 42. There was
not
cancellation. Yeah, they canceled the New London race. And that was the beginning of my my heavyweight experience. So I weighed perhaps 160 pounds, 61 or 2 pounds.
You were probably the lightest man in the boat?
Well, yes, when I got in the pickle boat at Derby for the annual affair.
What's the pickle boat?
The pickle boat is the substitutes boat. It's rowed in a 4, and these will be the spares from the varsity and the freshman and JV and somebody else. And
so you get a chance to row even if you don't get into the 8.
Yes, it was a nice idea. The trouble was that being the smallest man, I was so outpulled by the starboard side that we made a hash of the race, and so it wasn't. I wasn't really proud of that.
This was on the river at Derby?
That was in
Housatonic, I guess. Yeah.
That was kind of fun.
That was in 42 or 43?
That was in 42, and then the next year I was a full-fledged heavyweight. I weighed about the same, and then I disgraced myself academically, so I was on probation, and I was red-shirted anyway, so that even
if you're on probation, you were automatically...
on probation, I couldn't represent the school. So I'd lost the right to represent the school in intercollegiate competition. But I did row. I rowed one race with the freshman seconds, and we rowed one race with an MIT crew. The third crew rowed MIT something or other. There may have been some freshmen. So I did have a couple of outings, which was kind of fun. And the varsity and JV boats were being directed by Bert Haynes, because both Harvey and Tom had gone off to war in 43. So one coach is taking charge of all of the crews. So the third boat became my boat. I just went out and did with it what I wanted to, and Bert would tell me at the beginning of the afternoon what he wanted us to do, and I'd go out.
You acted as a semi-coach.
I was a semi-coach in that boat, and that was kind of fun. And people would be picked from the third boat by the coach as they developed, and be tried out in the JV, and they had to move somebody from JV to the varsity and swap people around. They always had the backup of the third boat, and so if a fellow did well, he could hope to move on. I couldn't hope to move on because I was in academic disgrace. I had to stay there, but I enjoyed the job. I loved that.
World War II being on, of course, that probably disrupted rowing schedules and competition in many sports like that.
I'm not really aware. I don't recall what happened to the schedule after I left, because I left in the summer of 43. But I think a lot of the collegiate athletic program was just simply curtailed, just cut back and gave up and waited until 46 when the war was over and then started it up again. That was certainly true of rowing.
What did you do in 43 when you left Harvard?
Well, I went straight into the Marine Corps. I was there 3 years.
And where were you stationed in the Marine Corps?
Well, I first went to Paris Island, where I had my boot training. I went from there to Cherry Point and got in with the air groups there training. And then halfway along, they were looking for men to replace the the line troops that had been lost on the beaches in the Pacific, and they were scooping up people that they thought they could give rifles and use to make for replacements for these men. And after they shuffled us around a while, they discovered that they really didn't want to make riflemen out of the people who had had a lot of Marine Corps training and some background in useful academic subjects like mathematics and so forth.
Had you had some military training or background before that?
Well, I'd been in ROTC, Naval ROTC, during that time, and I had completed that program. But since I had taken the trouble to flunk my academic program, why I washed out, so I didn't get my commission since I failed to get my degree. That was contingent. So there I was in the Marine Corps with 3+ years of a Harvard education, not much to show for it, but they kept finding this information when they pull my card. So fortunately for me, that meant that they were less inclined to make a foot soldier out of me and rather inclined to make a technician out of me. So I trained for an aerographer and went through that program at Cherry Point, trained up in Lakehurst, Lakewood, next to Lakehurst, the dirigible station, and then after about 11 months working in a control tower in Cherry Point, this shift to find men for the line came about. I wound up then at Camp Lejeune training again to be something else. This time I became a photogrammetrist, map maker, and I was doing that, finished the training and was working on the station at Lejeune when the war ended. So I never did get out, but I had an awful lot of technical training.
After you got discharged from the Marine Corps, where did you go then?
Well, I went straight home and waited till college took up in the fall. I got out in June, late June as I recall, might have been early July, and went off to a little boys' summer camp in 46. And I was there 2 months and then went on to college.
Back to Harvard?
Back to Harvard.
Back to rowing?
Back to rowing, yeah.
Had you done any rowing during the ensuing
Oh, no. But I was very keen on returning to rowing, and I suppose I was counting on my luck a little, but I had to think about some kind of future, and the only future I could fasten on that meant anything to me was to go back, finish up the work I had begun, and I had to get my degree, and I wanted to row some more, and I wasn't quite sure what my rowing career would be like. I don't think my notions of what I could do were unrealistic. I thought if I were lucky, I might get from third boat to second boat on the varsity crew.
Did you have any trouble getting back into Harvard?
I had a terrible time. Well, yes and no. I started out being interviewed by a man whose main interest was to make sure that the returning veteran knew exactly what he wanted to do, that he had a very strong commitment to finish up the work for his degree, allow him to do that, and get him through. They were making concessions for these men, and then when this dean asked me what I had planned to do, I said, well, I wasn't doing very well as an engineer, so I wanted to change my major. And at that point, I began to feel the interview was going sour, and I didn't know the fella anyway. So I asked if it would be convenient for me to talk to the dean who had presided over my leave-taking, and he was very, very good about that. I was surprised that he was so willing to abandon the interview at that point. But he immediately went to the door and leaned out and yelled across the hall, "Hey, Charlie!" And
that's the way they'd pronounce it in Boston, isn't it?
Oh, I thought they pronounced it that way everywhere, but at that time. Charlie Dewey stuck his head out of the door, and this dean said, "Here's a man says he's a friend of yours," or something like that. And I thought, well, now, of course, if after 3 years, Dean Dewey doesn't recognize me, I'm probably in trouble again, or worse. And he looked out and saw my face, called me by my name, and the relief was, I can't tell you how relieved I was to discover that perhaps I was going to get back in after all. Because at that moment, I knew that this man was probably not going to allow me to return. Not on those terms. Their terms, but not my terms. And that meant I'd be back in the engineering department trying to pass Calculus 2. I didn't seem as I was ever going to do that.
So you changed your major to?
American government, and began to work rather deliberately on the matter of my naivete, so that I wouldn't be quite as dumb in a couple of years after I'd finished that major as I was when I went out. Because I didn't know Sikkim when I left college, and it got to be an embarrassment to me.
Well, more important, did you get back onto the Harvard crew?
Well, I fought my way off probation the first term. I came back on probation. That was the college's agreement with me. And I got to the November hour exams and flunked 2 courses. It's not a very good beginning. And I was desperate, so I spent an awful lot of time in the library. And I studied and studied and studied. But in fact, I did row. I did row during the fall. And I don't know how I made it. It was the skin of my teeth. I got off probation, so I was clean for the 47 season, and I survived the spring.
And did you go onto the lightweight or the heavy?
No, I was a heavyweight, and the competition for stroke position, because I knew there was no other position I could hope to get. At my weight, I was just too small.
Yeah, you wouldn't get in the middle of the boat.
I wouldn't get in the middle of the boat, and there probably wouldn't be a place for me in the bow. There were still bigger people than I up there in that end, so I knew it was a stroke or else. And the varsity stroke had died during the winter, fall through the ice, and trying to cross
on the Charles River?
Tried to cross the Charles River at the broad part down near the basin, and the ice got thin. He went through and he was killed. And then I think somebody else quit, whatever. Suddenly there were openings where I never expected to see them, and 3 of us competed for the position of varsity stroke.
And you were successful?
I was successful because I could eliminate one man. I'm sure he's just too short. He couldn't keep the crew in the water. He's just too short, but stronger than I. And the other guy was younger and certainly as strong as I was, as far as I could tell. Good, clever oarsman. And one day when we were out rowing pieces together, two crews, I could see that the one made up mostly of the veterans and the other made up mostly of new people and bigger, were still not clearly the better one over the other. So it depended on who could make the boat go. By themselves, these crews were almost matched, but they shouldn't have been, because one crew was obviously stronger. But it was up to us 2 strokes to see which one could move the boat. So when it came,
is that a role that a good stroke can play successfully?
Well, I think strokes are chosen for that reason primarily, that whatever it is they do, no matter how strong they are, if they can make the boat go, they get the position. And then it gets kind of mysterious and mystical, a little hard to explain and describe, but the coach knows, and of course the man usually knows. My idea when the boats are brought together and the strokes are shifted, my idea was to get the word quickly to the coxswain what the program was going to be, exactly what I wanted him to get back in the boat, because I knew what the boat needed. And I would row the way I row, and the main thing was to get those people to do what I was doing, because I felt that if they did what I wanted them to do, we would go faster, and without going into detail. So I got this guy's eyes wide, focused on the end of my nose, and
the coxswain thought he was supposed to run the boat.
Well, yes, I think up to that time he probably thought he did, but I don't remember having seen him much around, so I knew.
Who was he? We have to identify him.
I don't remember the guy's name, and he disappeared soon after. That is, he may have been 3rd boat or 4th boat. He may have been cut. I don't know who he. I can't remember his name. I can't remember his face, but he was not a man I'd seen around before, and he didn't have experience. I could tell that right away. So I just took charge, and I really found in myself at that moment a desire that I probably hadn't suspected. I really wanted that job, and I was going to get it. So we sailed away, and we got the boat, got it organized, got it moving, and it was clearly the faster boat at the end of the piece. And I thought probably I had the job, and so it turned out. The strokes were never shifted again. And then after that, actually, only one man was ever shifted. And that boat got faster and faster and faster until finally it was over, say, a mile and 3/4, whatever our usual middle distance was. It was probably clearly 3 lengths better than the other crew. It's not a bad crew.
How did you fare in the 1947 racing season?
Well, we did pretty well. It was not an undefeated season, and we did some pretty scrabbly work in the early going, very rough. But we finally settled down, but not before we lost to Cornell on Cayuga in a race that was simply badly generaled. That was my fault. But then we get going again.
More importantly, how did you fare against Yale in 1947?
Well, Yale was kind of a new thing. They had a new coach, and came from Wisconsin, a guy named Walls, and he was going to try something a little different, high stroking, and a rather daring approach to turning Yale around, going to make them faster. But we beat them every time we met them, and until the race at New London, they never gave us a great deal of trouble. Then at New London, they became very tough. But the trouble with our race there was that we had gone out with the expectation that if the water conditions held, we could hope to break the course record. We'd begun to show some speed. We'd done well at the Eastern sprints, and we were only 2/10 of a second off the course record at Carnegie. That was a record that was set by the 1936 Olympic crew. So by that time we knew we were fast, and we thought, well, we can go fast for 4 miles too. But
the Yale-Harvard race is a 4-mile race.
Yes, yes, and a very punishing test. So
the races here today, for example, in Green Lake, they're called sprint races, are they? They're
yeah,
shorter.
That's the shortest sprint there is. Well, in small boats there are, I guess, 400-meter sprints or something on that order, but this is a 1,000-meter, very short race, and probably the best race for masters. Yeah. Although I myself like head racing a little bit better.
You're racing against time.
Yes, the head of the river, the head of the lake, whatever they call them, they're all intended to be raced against the clock. So you go off at intervals and they correct your time. And
if you run fast enough, you may pass some of the ones who started earlier.
You might. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do that. Yeah, they try to keep the interval workable, but yes, yeah, there's some passing. And if there are turns in the course, it gets a little bit
I was going to say, is there such a thing as a right-of-way in passing a boat?
Depends on what kind of waterman you have and what kind of competitors. I don't like to tear up the equipment, so I'll usually give the other crew a berth if I can. But
you don't get any credit for a collision.
You don't get any credit for a collision, and you've only yourself to blame if you wipe out one side of oars. And you're not doing your friendships any good if you tear off somebody's bow. So you have to think about it when you're trying to turn an 8 around a 180 turn at a buoy, which they have at this particular race. It's almost a 180.
Well, tell us about the 1947 Yale-Harvard race.
Well, that was...
How did it turn out?
That was, well, we won it, but it was a punishing experience because starting out with the idea that, number one, in the boat we felt that we could row to a record, and number two, the coach had seen Yale rowing time trials and gotten reports on their progress to the point where he was beginning to think, you know, they are going to be faster, and so we can't let them off the hook. If we let them off the hook, they're gone. So.
You mean by letting them get ahead of you?
Yeah, even with us. I don't think that Bowles wanted to see them alongside.
Bowles was still coaching at Yale.
Well, he had come back after the war.
Back after the war.
At Harvard.
Or at Harvard, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
yes.
And so tactically, the race was explained to the coxswain as get ahead and stay there. And the last thing that the coxswain was told was, when you hear Yale sprinting, match their sprint with them. And I thought, Godfrey mighty, I don't want to do that. But the cocks have been told by the coach to do it.
Those were Bowles' orders.
Bowles' orders. And I thought, I don't want to do that. But we did it. Yale had installed a buzzer in their boat. So every time they sprinted, well, maybe every time they sprinted, the buzzer went off. But I think...
What's the purpose of the buzzer?
Well,
wake up the crew?
Well, yeah, they wanted to be sure that nobody up there in the bow seats failed to jump in when the sprints were called. And that sometimes happens, that the bow 3 or 4 have to watch to see what the boat's doing and then join in. So they put the buzzer in. Now, if it were a smart cox, he would probably say to himself, now, I can do more damage to the other crew with my buzzer than I can help my own crew. My own crew knows pretty much what to do. They know they got to go faster every once in a while. They're going to have sprints every once in a while. But that buzzer, it seems to me, every time I got my breath, the buzzer was going off again. So we were
you think
always
some of them were
spinning.
fake buzzers?
I'm pretty sure they were faked. I think that...
to make you think that they were sprinting when they weren't?
Yeah. So they just kept prodding us, and we wound up a length ahead of the mile, 3 lengths ahead at 2.5 miles, and out of gas. And so that was kind of a...
So how was the last mile?
The last mile and a half was excruciating. We had people in the boat who were dying, me for one. 3, I found out later, was falling off the seat, and he was being kept alive by the 2 men who were splashing water on him. And
I mean, they were literally almost passing out.
Oh yeah. 3 had probably got to the point where it was very hard for him to sit up and hang on. And he'd gone to the well too often, and I had gone to the well too often, and
used up that excess energy.
You just don't have any more. When it's gone, it's gone. So by sprinting and doing all that foolishness, why we'd used up the reservoirs that we'd need to get over the last mile and a half. So that was a very punishing race for me.
Did you have a lead as a cushion, though, at that point?
Well, starting with 3 lengths, we just started to slow down. And Yale kept going. They were very much in the race, and on top of their effort, they didn't, I don't think they lost anybody. And they rode very strongly, right down to the wire, and got a length and a half of it back. The only thing that saved us was that we had the momentum, we had the rhythm, we kept it going pretty much. The stroke was just about out of it, and probably the 7-man was stroking the boat. But
who was your opposing stroke competition in the Yale boat?
Watson Blair, and he was another one of those 19-year-olds that kept turning up.
You were about 25 at this point.
I was 25, yeah. We had 19-year, I think I had a just turned 19 behind me at 7, and there were others who were that young, very young men. And then these are the post-war oarsmen. They were either youngsters, sophomores, let us say, bright, able athletes, or veterans of 24. So our port side was 24 and a half years old, and our starboard side was 19 years old. And Waddy Blair was one of Yale's youngsters.
I think his son is a lawyer here, living in Seattle now.
Which I'm delighted to hear, yes. I think that's marvelous. Yeah.
Well, so what happened at the finish line at the Yale Harvard race?
Well, at the finish line, we arrived, and, well, in getting there, we'd had to just level off, eliminate any real sprint, and made a token effort the last 100 yards and get to the end of the race, and where I collapsed. I didn't fall down, but when I went to move and the coxswain asked me to get ready to row back, about a quarter of a mile from the end of the race back to the boathouse, I told him I couldn't move. I tried, I couldn't move arm or leg. They were numb. So bow 6 rowed it home, and I was able to get out of the boat just, and I staggered off to the boathouse, and while they got dressed, showered and dressed and went off, I was lying on a bench with a couple of sheepskins over me, panting as hard as I could, and after about 20 minutes I got up and took a shower and went up and met my folks.
Your father come in to see?
Oh, yes. My father was anxious about why I hadn't turned up with the other oarsmen, and they said, oh, he's back there. They didn't know what he was. Nobody looked back. They didn't know what I was doing. And nobody could tell him anything. A couple of doctors were in attendance, taking my pulse. I'd like to have known what it was. I never did find out. And they ascertained that I wasn't going to die, and so it's just a matter of time. And while I was gathering
Your
myself
father, being
up,
a Harvard man, must have been proud
oh
at
yes,
that moment.
well he was, and it had been a long day, and the race had been postponed, and he'd probably had a few drinks to sustain himself through this, all this
Spectators were permitted
excitement,
to do that.
which they were permitted to do, and so I think it broke down his resistance, his reserve, I should say, and he came in. I was absolutely alone in the locker room. There's nobody there, and he bent over me, and he was going to tell me something, and he kissed me on the lips, and I looked up, tears raining down his face, and tears raining down my face, and he said something. I don't know what he said, and I don't think he could have spoken if he'd wanted to. And then he got up and went outside, and as I say, perhaps 10 or 15 minutes later, I went out, greeted him very formally, shake the hand, congratulations, well done. The facade was back up, and things were just the way they were before.
And what did you? Then you graduated in June of '47.
No, I had to.
You had to go back.
Yeah, I had a term left, and.
What did you do the summer of 1947? Did you come out here to Seattle? Was that the time you came out here to race?
Well, of course, yeah. We had the postseason race a week or so, 9 days or so after the race at New London. We came to Seattle with all the other crews that were racing. See, we raced on a Wednesday, and all the other crews had raced at Poughkeepsie, all the major crews, on a Saturday. Sunday, we all took train from New York or Poughkeepsie up to Chicago. And there we were put on a brand new train for a new line for the Hiawatha and the Milwaukee line.
Milwaukee Railroad. Yeah.
And 9, 10, yeah, we picked up Wisconsin there. So 10 crews in train and went from there to Seattle.
Did you train en route on the Milwaukee?
Training? That's
Hiawatha?
a funny thing. You know, we didn't train. I don't remember anybody running up and down the tracks or doing anything. We just ate, slept, got off the train, walked around, had our pictures taken, got back on the train, ate, slept. Everybody was tired. We were all exhausted.
Because of Poughkeepsie and the
Yeah,
Harvard race.
yeah. Nobody could move anyway. It takes, if you're going to row 4 miles, it takes the best part of a week to recover. It's a terrible drain. So, 20 minutes of hard rowing leaves you not just exhausted, but depleted. And it takes your body quite a while to get back. So there was no training. I wonder what a modern coach would do. They'd probably go out and run.
Where did you race on Lake Washington?
Well, we were down in the course that ends down inside the cove at Seward Park, and that was the 2,000-meter course that they had set up, and had raced it. I don't know how many years previously, but the year previously in '46 they had set up the race that they repeated in '47. It was a new thing, and it was put together by some men like George Gunn, and I keep remembering Torchy Torrance's name in there, some connection, and some other boosters, and they persuaded the town to go for it, and they sprung for the money it took to bring these crews out and house them and feed them and so forth. It was quite an undertaking.
How did you fare in that race?
Well, we won it. And I like to remember the time when George Pocock came out with Tom Bowles, and of course Tom and he had a very close association that went way
the
back.
days when Bowles had been at University
Yes.
of Washington.
And Bowles had learned an awful lot from George. He used to spend, sometime during the summer he'd get back out and get in a boat with George and learn. And he learned a good deal from George. So we had a time trial in the ship canal. Might have been a Thursday, must have been a Thursday. And Tom was in the coach boat, and George Pocock. And we had done pretty well. I don't know what the time was. I didn't pay any attention to that sort of thing. The boat felt good. First time we'd actually rowed with any kind of strength. We were getting to feel good again. And as the launch came back in again to the canoe house, the old seaplane hangar, the press greeted George as he stepped out of the coach boat, and George was always ready with a comment. So when the press asked him about what he had just seen in watching Harvard do this time trial, he said, "Gentlemen, I have just seen the winning crew." And I think I heard that after the race, fortunately. I would have been pretty upset if I'd heard it before the race. Before the race, I was interviewed by somebody from the press, and they usually, they're going to ask, "Are you going to win?" And you think of some way to get out of that gracefully. I thought we were in the ballpark, I thought we could win, but I was feeling very cautious, and I was in the usual apprehensive frame of mind. But I knew we had a good crew, and the last thing that concerned me was something purely mechanical. We'd come back from that row, and 5 and 6, the biggest men, had said they're having difficulty getting their oars clear. So I said, well, you'll have to look at the pins, see if the thole pins have been bent back. And sure enough, I went into the boathouse and called for the rigger, very helpful gent, and said, if you look at my riggers 5 and 6, check them to see if the posts are... So he looked at them and said, no, you bent the posts over. So he jacked them up again with a long length of iron bar. And what those guys had done on the start, you know, they just taking the riggers right off the boat.
They just put too much power in it.
Very powerful men. And it might not have made any difference, but at least that it made them comfortable and confident when they were trying to work their oar at those speeds. They didn't want to have that thing feel as if it wasn't going to come out of the water. So that meant we were ready to go, and I felt we were going to do well.
Who was second and third in that race?
Interestingly enough, all 3 places were in adjacent lanes. Yale was on one side of us. Washington was on the other. That was the freshman with Bill Works out of
Washington raced its freshman crew?
Yeah. Their varsity had not been fast, and then again, the coach had to deal with the fact that all of these varsity oarsmen had rowed at Poughkeepsie. Some of them may not have recovered, and there were a few that came down with colds and whatnot. I don't know the story in the Washington boat, but the freshman was a very good boat. It was a very fast boat. So they plugged in the varsity captain, Bill Works, at 4, and the rest of them were freshmen, and they rowed very well. They were very fast. And out of that crew came the next year's Olympic 4.
From the University of Washington?
Yeah, that was the same guys. They were all sophomores that went into that boat. So they were rowing on the one side, Yale was on the other, and fortunately for us, the tough competition was right beside us. So you didn't have to look way down across there were 12 boats in the race, to lane 1 and lane 12, because they can easily get away. You don't know what they're doing away. That's a long way.
Far away, you can't see all.
Well, it's very hard for the cocks to be sure where they are at that distance. 6 boats away on either side. That's difficult. And my cox was a little short-sighted anyway.
Well, following that race in 1947 here in Seattle, then, as I understand, you went back to Harvard to complete your collegiate work and graduated when? December or so, or 47 or early 48?
Actually, 48. I think February marked the end of the academic.
Where did you go then?
Well, I think I was in Cambridge for only a week or so, and home to Lowell, getting things organized for my trip, and we took off. We must have taken off early March, my friend and I, to make this tour that brought us back out to Seattle.
What influenced you to come to Seattle eventually?
Well, I had a couple of concerns. One was that I hadn't fixed on a career. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with my life, and I felt constrained by the New England mystique, and I thought, if I'm going to have to make it here in the world I've known, I've got to get my act together. And I don't know whether I'm going to be able to do it fast enough, since I haven't decided what I wanted to do. And Seattle had turned out to be such an attractive place, physically attractive. There's so many nice people.
And lots of water.
And lots of water. It was a nice place to go back to. And so when I found myself there again, I thought, well, why don't I make my stand here, see what I can do. And then I ran into people like Irving Clark Sr., had a wonderful conversation, the shortest discussion that I ever had about a career, and one of the most satisfying. I'd been here for quite a few months and working with a junior program. And
junior rowing program.
The junior rowing program. And Irving Clark Jr. would invite me to his house every once in a while with other friends, and we'd get together of an afternoon Sunday and go swimming and whatnot. And we were always cordially welcomed. This is his father's house by his mother and his dad. So I walked in the door this one time, and Irving Sr. greeted me with, "Hi, Frank, how you doing? You know, got a job yet?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, plenty of time for that." And I thought, no, I could do well here.
Well, we had a little background noise there for a moment, I guess. I don't know if they're reeling in fish or one of the boats, or the buoys.
The straightening Well, that's wire. That's probably stretched.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, so you settled in Seattle, and what sort of work or job did you take up other than pursuing your rowing?
Well, let's see. The first thing I did, I was living for a while. I lived in the Seattle YMCA. Then I lived in first I lived in the college club. Right away, I got invited to stay in the college club, and I was there a week or two, whatever the limit is, and they threw me out. And I went to the YMCA, and then through friends, I got invited to enter this men's establishment, sort of a club called the Monks Club. And there was about 30 men living there.
Very famous Seattle institution.
You know about that?
Well, I mean, at that time, I think many.
It was pretty well established, yeah, and it had its alums, I guess. So I was welcomed in there. They were treating me very nicely, and I stayed there for quite a while, until I got married, actually. And while I was there, this very small outfit came in to steam clean the building preparatory to painting it, and I had been trying to look for jobs, and people had set up interviews for me and were looking for jobs for me. And I kept finding myself in these awkward interviews in which this very charming guy would be trying to ferret out of me what on earth I could contribute to his company. And I could see...
You said you can row stroke.
Well, I was careful not... See, everybody knew about me in these interviews. They already knew the background pretty much, because somebody would say, well, this is the guy who, and I'd show up, and then, of course, he would like to know whether the guy who could do anything. Well, since I had a clue as to what this was all about, except that I knew the name of the company and the man I was being interviewed by, I wasn't really... There we go.
Back on. You tell me when you're ready. How did the job interviewing finally end up, Frank?
Well, after a few of those, I realized that I was creating embarrassment for the people who were trying to help me, because if you're going to apply for a job, you should go there with some understanding of what they do in their business, and then be prepared to explain what your qualifications are for entering that business and perhaps helping them out. And so after being the recipient of all this help, I thought, this isn't going to work. So I grabbed the first job I could find, and that was with this little outfit that was steam cleaning the building. And one of the guys who was doing the job was on strike with the aeromechanics union at Boeing. And while they were out, they all had to find some way to survive, so he had picked this up. And he suggested Boeing and so forth. Let me think. It may have been that I had already applied at Boeing, but I can't remember it. Anyhow, jobs are sticky, so I went with this one, and I spent probably 2 months of the summer of '48 steam cleaning buildings of various kinds, some houses, homes, and a couple of buildings down in the city, and that was kind of fun. 14 stories above the street, cleaning ceramic tile on the face of a building, swinging from a scaffold that I'd hitched up myself, and done a lot of things that were very daring and exciting and scared me half to death. But it was something different and interesting, and I could make enough money to survive. I could pay my bill at the Monks Club and eat, and I didn't need much else. And I was coaching. I wasn't getting paid for coaching, so I was just scraping by. Well, I was coaching the junior crew here on Green Night. Yeah. So the summer went by very nicely. I met a guy named Frank Cunningham. Oh, another one of my interviews brought me to the Seattle First National Bank, and I found myself in front of Frank Cunningham. And Frank Cunningham had just acquired the 52-foot Dorade, which is one of the great...
You sure it wasn't the People's National Bank, or was it Seattle First?
Seattle First in those days.
Oh. So yeah, it was Frank Cunningham.
It was Frank Cunningham, long gone. And so while we were talking, suddenly the conversation took a bounce, and I thought we were going to be talking about me in the banking business. And Frank Cunningham had no interest in pursuing that line.
But he did like racing.
But he had this boat, and it was a big boat, and he needed some crew. So he said, you know anything about sailing? I said, well, I've sailed all my life. And he said, well, how would you like to crew with me weekends through the summer? So I thought, wait a minute. Well, it would be dumb to say no. So I said, well, yes, fine. And I thought, if I say yes and I go out and crew with him, on his boat during the summer, then we can get back to the banking job, you see. Never came up again. Either then or thereafter on the boat. He never discussed me working in the bank. So there I was, steam cleaning buildings, covered with grime and dirt, down in Seattle by night, coaching at Green Lake during the week, and then I'd go out in this fabulous yacht and sail around the Sound.
The raid was very famous, racing yacht.
Oh yes, great Sparkman and Stevens original. I mean, it was a very great racer and miserable to live in. It was this long white cigar, but gee, that was fun. I had a lot of fun that summer. And then,
when did you finally end up in teaching?
Well, first I had to find steady work. Eventually I did get to Boeing, and I worked there for the best part of a year, during which time I had a lot of conversations with a friend I'd made when I first got to Seattle. My friend, John Durant, had been neighbors with this man, a fellow named Bill Bernard, back in Winchester. And
Winchester, Massachusetts.
Winchester, Massachusetts. And when the Bernard family moved out, they kept contact with the Durants, and so we had a name when we came to Seattle, and we looked this family up, and Bill and I get along very well. He's living with his mother and his sister. We saw his brother once in a while. We used to visit quite often. And during that winter, he kept coming back to this theme that he took up almost the first day I think I ever met the guy. And that was public school teaching. And I thought, I was quite indifferent to the idea at first, but I had an opportunity to look back and see the way I'd spent my time in the Marine Corps and the sort of things I'd done, and I thought, well, maybe I'm that sort of a person. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. But as the winter wore on, I realized that I was not going to advance in the Boeing company. Again, they were very cordial, very helpful to me, and had no illusions about me and me in the airplane industry. In the person of the foreman, he was a very understanding guy, and an outdoorsman, good man to know. Jack Hossack, I think his name was, Hostak, something like that. And he was a member of the Seattle Mountaineers Club. So I happened to find people who were like-minded and had the same interests, and I got along very well with all these people. But again, I was not at the bottom of anybody's ladder. I was just a feller trying to make a living. And so I thought, well, why is it that other people seem to know more about what my career possibilities are than I do? And I thought, well, I've never been a great genius for making important decisions. And so I thought, well, why not? So I went around to Bill and said, I give up. I guess I'll be a teacher. So he said, well, you're going to have to go to the university and take the ed courses and fill out the required whatever, so they'll certify you for teaching in the state. So back to school in some time, well, in the summer term of 49, yeah. So then I was 5 quarters at the University of Washington, and during the summer, while I was finishing up the last quarter, I applied for a couple of jobs, interviewed at Bellevue, interviewed at Edmonds, and decided to take the Edmonds job. It was near saltwater, and Bellevue was on freshwater.
Edmonds High School?
Edmonds High School, yeah. So finally, for frivolous reasons, I chose the job I took, and I was there for 18 years.
At Edmonds?
At the Edmonds High School, yeah. And lived in Edmonds.
Did they have any crew program there during those years?
No. I did get, I think, one boy from Edmonds to commute to Green Lake in the afternoons and go down there and row. And he stayed for 3 or 4 years and enjoyed it, but it was too far. And the commute for a high school student was difficult at best. So.
After teaching at Edmonds, where did you go then?
Well, after 18 years, I felt kind of used up working in the public schools, and I went down
What did you teach, by the way, in the public school?
Well, I was teaching English and some history, U.S. history, and I had gotten together with a very aggressive and imaginative department chairman of English on a course that we made up as we went along, and an experimental sort of thing, which seemed to work, and so that was my elective, and I was enjoying that. I was happy with that for a while, and that probably made it possible for me to continue to teach there. It's very hard work, and I felt always I felt the lack of confidence of the community in the school system. It always would surface at election time when we'd have to present bond issues to the electorate, and then they would decide whether or not they wanted this or that program or a new building or whatnot. So you were always right on the edge, and the administration never sounded as if they could be confident in the support they were getting from the community, and yet to the community they had to express quite a different view. So it was a difficult position for them to be in, and as a teacher we were never comfortable, never allowed to feel comfortable for a minute. That was just kind of wore me down.
When did you first become involved with the Lakeside School?
Well, I had met Dexter Strong fairly early on in my Edmonds High School experience through another teacher who lived out in Edmonds.
He was then headmaster of Lakeside.
Yeah. So he had said at the time, well, come around and see me when you get interested. Then years went by. In my 5th year, I applied for a fellowship to Yale, which was funded by John Hay Whitney Foundation, and this was a fellowship offered to 20 high school teachers across the country, and I got the fellowship. I had a year off and went back to Yale and had a marvelous time.
What did you do? Study some more?
Well, we were fellows, so we didn't have to do anything. So we took some courses for credit, audited some, looked around.
Did you help the Yale crew during that year?
Well, one of the members of the selection committee turned out to be Tom Mendenhall, who was an old Yale rowing buff.
And he's written quite a bit about the rowing history.
Short history, yeah, right. And,
former president of Smith College.
Right. And he said, when he saw my name turning up as an applicant for the fellowship, he turned to the other members of the committee, I think there were 10 or 11 members, and he said, we got to get this guy, he's a good rower. I said,
Tom Mendenhall had rowed himself.
Oh, yeah.
Undergraduate.
Yeah, he was on a good one. So I thought, gee, Tom, that was a heck of a way to present a scholarly candidate for a fellowship. But he knew what he was doing. And so when I got there, first off, Tom said, well, you know, we're going to need a coach for the intramural program. Dick Pocock, George's brother, is retiring, so we need somebody to kind of look after these crews that are going to be boating.
Yes, the residential colleges that Yale had, some of them had crews, didn't they?
Yeah, each college had its own crew, and there might have been, oh gosh.
Probably 8 or 10?
Yeah, in the neighborhood. Some had their own coaches, and others were just coaching themselves, and so I had a kind of a ill-defined job, but clear enough. I just helped where I was wanted, so they paid me for that.
This was probably 1968 or thereabouts?
No, that happened in my 5th year at Edmonds. So it's in 56, the spring of 56. So that year went very pleasantly for me. I enjoyed that.
Wasn't that the year that the Yale crew went to the
56, yeah, that's right. Rusty Wales' crew went to Melbourne.
Yes, Rusty's here racing in these races. So after your year at Yale on the
well, I came back.
Fellowship, you came back to Seattle.
I came back with the idea that perhaps I could survive another 5 years, and who knows after that. Maybe something good would happen as a consequence of my having done the fellowship. But the school district was only interested in how many credits I had gotten for going to Yale for a year, and I said, well, I took advantage of the opportunity to learn and explore, so I didn't take much for credit, so I didn't advance on the salary schedule. So it was a wipeout from a professional point of view. And then I had to do some other things to get credit so they would pay me for it was probably the most unimaginative and short-sighted program for teacher advancement that you can imagine.
Gave you a breather.
Oh, I had a great time. And my natural snobbery kind of buoyed me up because I thought, well, hell, it doesn't really matter.
You mean all those years here in the Northwest hadn't destroyed your New England snobbery?
Well, I won't call it New England snobbery, but when I realized what the league was like, you know, what kind of a league I was in, I saw that I was going to be out of step anyway, and that people were going to be a little bit put off by the Ivy League background. And then when I got the fellowship and went not to Harvard but to Yale, I had a choice between Yale and Columbia. And I chose Yale because I thought the countryside would be better for my kids. Besides, I knew I'd be happier at Yale than Columbia. And,
let me go back for a minute. You had children by then. We haven't dealt with your marriage. Where and when did you get married?
Well, as I recall, I was married May 28, 1949. So about the time I gave up my Boeing job, I decided to become a teacher and decided to get married.
Someone you met here in Seattle, or?
Yes, I met my wife, who was a secretary at Boeing. Probably the first day I applied for a job there.
What was her maiden name?
Harris, Laura Jane Harris.
You got married, and then you had a number of children?
Got married in late spring of '49. Had children 2 years later and 2 years thereafter, so we had stair-step.
Who are those two children?
Three. We had Laurie in 51 and Chris in 53 and Ellen in 55.
Now going back to your teaching career, then you're back at Edmonds High School after your interlude at Yale for 1 year, and after some additional time at Edmonds, you left Edmonds.
I left Edmonds because I couldn't do it anymore. I was just burned out. I tried everything. I'd done everything that they'd thrown at me. I'd done the best I could, and I realized that in terms of a career, it was a dead end. But I was exhausted, so I went back to Dexter Strong and said that I'd like to continue to teach, but I didn't think I could continue in the public school system because I was too tired, used up, and it was not what I'd call a representation I would recommend. But he was sympathetic, and we got along very well. And he hired me to teach 8th grade, some juniors. And when I got there, I don't know as we talked about rowing before I got there, we may have. But then I talked to the man who had been doing the rowing program, and he didn't want to be the head coach, so I said, okay, I'll be the head coach, and I took up from there.
They had a rowing program, though.
Yes, they had gotten started when a teacher there, Bob Spock, had called me back in very early 60s, I think, and asked about joining the Seattle Junior Crew program. And so I was the contact man, and I said, yeah, they told him who to talk to, and so they began bringing Lakesiders over here.
To Green Lake.
To Green Lake in 61 or 2, about in there. So there were sporadic attempts to have a Lakeside crew, and then a few years later, Dan Aero got out of the Navy and came to teach, and he became the coach and taught for 3 years, coached for 3 years.
Oh, he coached the crew?
Coached for 3 years, and then got busy and went back to get a doctorate. I think that was why he left. And then a fellow came in who was a Syracuse graduate and doing graduate work at the University of Washington, and he coached for 3 years.
You were teaching there during this time, though?
No. I was during all this time. I was at Edmonds.
Oh, you were still at Edmonds.
So this is the background of the Lakeside rowing program until I got there in 68. So that the spring of 69, I picked up where these other two coaches left up. The only formal coaching at Lakeside then had been done by two men. One was Aero, and the other, I can't remember his name. And then I came, and I was there for 11 years.
Until when?
Until 1980.
Well, now, during that whole period from 1948, when you came to Seattle, through 1980, let's say, when you left teaching at Lakeside, were you more or less actively involved in rowing in Green Lake and other ways here in the Seattle area?
Well, let's see. I began my association with the Lake Washington Rowing Club along about that time, so I was participating.
When was the Lake Washington Rowing Club established, by the way?
I think they probably organized in around 57. I'm not sure, but they were getting ready to go to the Olympiad in 1960. That was the idea to get. So they went to some national competitions. I think they went to some Pan American Games.
Where are they headquartered?
Well, their headquarters at the time was on the Washington campus in a shed beside the old canoe house.
And they included a lot of Washington alumni, I take it?
Quite a few.
And others as well.
And others. I couldn't tell you the distribution, but yeah, they had a good smattering of...
Did you use University of Washington shells then?
No, they were all bought for the purpose. They were bought by the club, for the club, donated, whatnot. But that was all equipment was quite discreet from the University of Washington.
And you rowed primarily on Lake Washington?
And they were, since they were that close, they were on the canal, in the cut. They could say they were Lake Washington because they could row a mile and be on it. Yeah, that's why they decided.
Well, during some almost 40 years that you've been in Seattle, since 1948, I suppose it's fair to say you have devoted a substantial amount of your time to one or the other kind of rowing programs or coaching or rowing yourself?
Well, I feel that I made a substantial contribution to getting the Green Lake program going. And
what was your involvement with starting the Green Lake program?
Well, I coached from the very beginning, and I repaired all their boats from the very beginning. No matter who was coaching, I coached for 7 years, but I repaired their boats from 1948 until 1968, and a little beyond that.
Down here
just to
at
get
Green
it done.
Lake? Or?
Yeah, yeah. And then I was instrumental in getting the Lake Washington Rowing Club established in its own quarters, independent of the university and away from the campus.
And where are those quarters now?
And now they're on Lake Union in a floating house, and pretty well established now as an entity, and they have complete autonomy and run their own show. And then the third organization that I gave continuity and a kind of a security to was in the shape of a building. I got that the Lakeside crew out there at Kenmore. The boys and I built the building and got them settled up there. And what time is it?
Are you joking? Rachel doesn't know how to do nothing.
Okay, coming down the course is the men's 8:45 plus.
I don't know.
No. We don't want that other crew. Hey, thanks, Howard. Oh, good trip. Thank you. My pleasure. Yeah. Tell that jerk off over here. You hear me? Tell that jerk off. I'm on you like a cheap suit. Tried very hard. You certainly did.
This boat is going to be used immediately.
Okay, what, you got a blade for me, or?
Do you want to use this one, or do you want to use one of the wooden scoops?
I think we should have the same blade.
God, all the girls do.
Jim? But I earn it.
Jim, we're going to switch. Yes, we are.
Use the same mark.
No, we're using different ones. Jim.
And what's your name? Barbie? Make sure I get it back. I want to be right.
What kind of horse are those? These are standard horses. Oh. You guys got a lot for time.
That's good.
Well, it's right working reverse for us.
Let's just go.
What lane are you in? Lane 3, Barbie. Is that the bell barker motor?
This thing is so much lighter. Oh, I'm so busy. Look at my camera. I didn't see how you did. Well,
They came in.
So I don't get dumped on. Yeah. Did you give a little leaning? I just knew where I was going.
Thompson looks down the port side, but she doesn't know if someone's
But see, we actually kept the boat set up enough so that everybody got a full plate all the way down. Thanks for the help, Alex. We were pretty well organized today.
yeah.
Yeah. Timing stayed pretty good. We didn't have any bad plays. No bad. We just don't go.
I was pleased. Roy was getting that horse down.
Oh, he's a pretty lord. Oh, geez, great.
He really burns out.
You guys are good for that.
You are. We got to see more of you, Roy.
I need some happening too.
Oh,
Roy drops another 20 pounds. He's going to be a tiger.
yeah, Roy filled in for.
Frank, you want these blades right here?
Well, they're all going back. No, those are girls' ones. Those go back. When you have them here. Well, right up back there behind the boards on the grab sidewalk. Hey, Charlie? Charlie?
Lane 3 is Lake Washington Club. Lane 4 is Rocky Mountain. Lane 5 is Green Lake Cruise. Lane 6 is Cambridge. That's event 102 and double 27 plus.
Some nice lady took my...
We were talking before we interrupted our interview a little while ago so that you could go out and race in the 8 and got some pictures of you coming in at the dock afterwards. It was a good race. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it was a good race in the sense that we did the best we could, and we practiced almost not at all, and almost never with the same complement. There's always somebody different in the boat. But we've been fortunate in mustering enough people so that we could get the 8 on the water for the last 3 years, I think. So we'd race twice a year in the 8. And this 8 was substantially the crew that we've rode with over the last 3 years.
Did you tell us before who was on this crew of 8? Or maybe you could remind me again. Who rode with you just a few minutes ago?
Bow was Ben Porter. 2 was Stan Pocock. And 3 was Charlie McIntyre. 4 was Jim Gardner. 5 was John Sundquist. And 6 was Roy Rubin. And 7 was Lyman Hull. Stroke was me. And,
All from Seattle?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And you'd rode together as 8 before?
Except for Roy. We have been rowing that crew for a couple of years. John came into the crew last year, and the rest, Stan came into the crew this year. Yeah, so we made some changes. 2 years ago, we had Dick Erickson up there, and 2 or 3.
Is this the one who had coached formerly or rode?
Oh, yeah, University of Washington coach, Dick Erickson. Who else has been in there? We've had to substitute people who come in and helped us out so we get the boat in the water. And so it's not a crew that's rowed together or even raced together in exactly that configuration. So we went out without properly practicing. And what we hoped was that we would be able to get our act together between launching and the starting line.
Well, you were rowing out there, you mean?
Yeah.
Practicing.
Well, that's the only chance we have. We've been out, we've practiced in that boat maybe 2 hours since we decided we're going to enter this race. And in the 4, Ben and Jim, Lyman and I have rowed in the 4 and practiced in the 4 a few more times. But for this particular regatta, we had very little practice. So we felt pretty good that we had done as well as we did.
Now, the silver medal that you're wearing now was for which race?
This is the mixed double.
Oh, that was for the mixed double?
Yeah, that was this morning.
That was this morning. Who did you row with in that?
Norma Jean Sands. She's 40, and she started rowing for the club back in '66 or so. So I've been rowing. I coached her and rowed with her off and on for a good many of those 20 years.
Where did you coach her?
Well, I coached her when the club was still on the campus, in the old shed by the canoe house.
On the University of Washington campus?
On the University of Washington campus. And we were there for, well, quite a few years, let me think. It wasn't until about 10 years ago, so 76 or 7, as I recall, that we had to get into the present site. But in the meantime, there was a period of about 2-3 years when all the equipment was taken from that shed, this awful little shed, and brought into Conaberry. So it was housed with all the University of Washington equipment. And that's the reason why I thought it was important to get under a separate cover, a separate roof. And we moved it about 10 years ago. Norm and I then have rowed back in the old days, and there was a period when she's been doing graduate work with us and that. She's been in Norway and out of town, out of the country, and she's been back with us at the club for 2 going on 3 years, I think, now. So we had no chance to get
Is mixed racing relatively new in the history of rowing?
Yes, I would have to say. Yeah, I can't recall that we ever did any of that back in the 60s. No, it took a long while before we did mixed racing. Well, when the club began to be a mixed club, same as other clubs, it began to be important.
Well, isn't it true that the explosion in women's rowing, much of it has come in the last 20 years or so?
Yeah, just about 20 years.
At the present time, it seems as though girls and young women are just as interested in rowing as young men are.
Well, more so because they're more appreciative of the opportunity that they have to enter a sport which was up to that time closed to them. There was no encouragement at all for women to get into rowing. It's very much a man's sport and controlled and dominated by men. There's a kind of an old boy, old school tie, traditional feeling about the sport, and men, without knowing that they were causing offense, just regarded it as our sport. Yet a lot of them knew that women could perfectly well row, given the opportunity, but then who was going to give them the first opportunity? I do remember back in the 40s that at the Cambridge Boat Club in Cambridge, Massachusetts, there were women rowing, but I don't know what kind of competitive opportunities they had. All that seemed to be a product of this new thing that happened about the early 60s. In fact, here in Seattle, it was Aldina Nash, wife of Ted Nash, the Pennsylvania coach, and once a member of the rowing club, was on the Olympic 1960 straight four with Dan Aero and Rusty Wales. He was very active with Ted, and Ted was very active in the club for I don't know how many years. And after maybe 2 years, he and his wife apparently had some deep discussions about women's rowing. She wanted to enjoy it the way he did, and well, one thing led to another. And she was, I think, the one around whom the others gathered, and they made up the first women's crew. And today we had with us Nancy Blakemore, who was one of those first women who rowed for Lake Washington Rowing. So for them, it began right here in the Lake Washington Rowing Club in '62 or something like that.
And I suppose for women, as for men, obviously it has some of the same attractions. It's something you can do the year round, and it's for a long time, even as you get older, and good exercise.
Yeah, there's a lot to recommend it as a life sport. It's something you can do all your life, they found out. And more than that, I think it's a sport that's well adapted to women's physiques. And my view is that women are probably better adapted to the movement in rowing than men are, because their flexibility makes it easy for them to do what for a lot of men is very difficult.
Timing and coordination is equally important with power, isn't it?
Oh yes, I think the point's well made by women in rowing, because we have women who are nowhere near as strong as men, who row as well, and many women with, say, comparable experience or length of time on the water can row at least as well as men, row better than men. They just don't go very fast. And the difficulty is, being an equipment sport, that the equipment's all too big. You got boats that are too big, oars that are too big.
They're built for men who are taller and heavier.
That's right. You look at the limits, the range of accommodation in a shell for oarsmen of various sizes, and the range from, say, 5'8" to 6'4". Now, so the boat you see or you used to see, always was adapted to those measures. And then the women came in, and the tallest woman might be 5'8" or 9", but she's not as strong. So, although you can just get her onto the seat, give her enough range of motion so she can get up and down the slide, she's still fastened onto an oar that, in terms of leverage and the size of the blade in the water, puts her at a great disadvantage. So, in order for her to get to what we like to call racing rates, stroke rates, she's going to have to cut the stroke off. In other words, she cannot produce rates the way a man can, because in order to get to the rate, she has to give away something on the stroke. She can't get through the water fast.
Are there any minimum or maximum specifications for shells?
No, well, there are limits made for international rowing by the international organization, and there are minimum weight limits then for the boats. It cannot be lighter than, but the dimensions are under no regulation at all.
It's just, of course, make them too long and they won't be effective.
Well, people have tried to play with length and breadth and depth and section and that sort of thing. They've been doing that for years.
Have they used tanks to test them in that respect?
Yeah. I think certainly over the years, whenever anybody had the opportunity to get a design into a tank, they'd certainly do it. And there have been tank-tested boats. I don't know anything about that. For example, whose boats in these races were tank-tested. But I think the young people in the game are coming in with all kinds of mathematical and engineering background, and there are some naval architects still working on the problem.
Sort of like with the America's Cup contenders.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, this is a high-tech sport because it's one of the variables that you can still do something about. You get the biggest people, the strongest people, you condition them and so forth, and you teach them how to row as well as you can. And then you get them on the race course and in some kind of equipment or other, and they all look around, and the first thing they're going to say, if they lose the race by, say, a short margin, 5 or 6 feet, isn't it possible that we could have been in a faster boat?
Why did they put a minimum weight limitation?
Well, because you can actually create a boat that is so light that it will be of no value at all over maybe 5 or 6 races.
You mean a kind of a throwaway boat?
It's a throwaway boat, and there have been throwaway boats. We saw them in international competition turning up about 10 years ago. They were actually built to throw away.
And it was felt this was not desirable?
Well, who could afford a throwaway boat? It costs just as much to build a boat that you throw away as it does to build a boat that you keep. And who knows, maybe even more. So that meant that the only people who could compete in the sport at the top level were the people who had the money. And the most money produce the best results, because if you could get the weight down and down and down and down, you get that particular variable to count much more heavily in the outcome of the race than would ever be the case when everybody rode the same wooden boat. And they were within a few pounds, about the same, and the same in every other respect too. I can, well, to recall the race in '47, there were 12 boats in the race. Every single crew was boated in the same shell. And they're all built by George Pocock, and they were, except for the most minor differences, the same boat, the same mold,
Now, in some sports, I think in some sailing racing too, for example, they will require people to use a standard boat or race different boats.
Well, yes, because the best competition puts athlete against athlete. And,
not boat against boat.
Not boat against boat. It seems as though in the best of the sailing competition, that's the case. In the case of America's Cup, very much, I think, depends on the skill of the designer, the availability of materials, and how much money they spend, sure. It's a rich man's endeavor, and in fact, now you'll never hear of a single rich man, very rarely, one single man funding the whole effort of getting a cup contender in the water. Syndicates now are doing that. Well, where it comes to...
In that connection, is rowing relatively inexpensive for people who compete like those have here today and yesterday?
The only way rowing can be considered inexpensive is when it's conducted by a club that is large enough to have the resources to provide all the equipment that its members need to race at the top level. But an individual is very hard put to equip himself to race at the top level.
How much in today's market would a good racing shell cost, like the 8 and the 4 and the singles?
I'm sure they start at $9,000 and go up for an 8, and at the other end, of course, the smaller the boat, the more expensive.
The smaller boats are more expensive?
Well, per man. If you're talking about per capita, the expense of an 8 can be distributed over 9 people, let's say. So the per capita cost of boating an 8 gets down to around $1,000 a head. But if you want a single of equivalent quality, you're going to talk about $4,000, and right away you quadruple the cost of entering the race at.
But such a boat, if cared for, would presumably last many years. Am I correct?
Maybe. No, there are boats now that have a racing life of perhaps 3 or 4 years, and then will probably have to be replaced. They just made out of plastic. No matter how strong they are, it's in the nature of the material that it changes its shape forever.
Let's go back on that for a minute. In the early years of racing, I take it all, or at least most of the boats were made out of wood. Is that correct?
Oh yes.
And the Pocock, the early Pocock shells were all basically wooden shells.
Yes.
When did the changeover start to new materials?
Gee, I can remember being here on Green Lake years ago in the 50s and seeing my first fiberglass motorboat. And racing shells didn't turn up in fiberglass for another 15 years, 20 years. It's hard to say, 15 years. Can't remember when I saw my first. Well, Pocock's Training Single was one of the first fiberglass boats I ever saw, and that was not intended to be a race boat. The first fiberglass boats were not light enough to be race boats. And later on, they discovered ways of making them lighter by using carbon fiber and some different techniques in the construction. Very, very thin laminates, paper-thin laminates.
Did the wooden boats have a longer life, both for racing and otherwise?
I remember George Pocock telling me that the 1948 gold medal for the University of Washington fellows
won the Olympics.
Won the Olympic gold medal in a boat that was 10 or 12 years old. It was 12 years old because it was built in 1936 and was rowed in 1948. And was a very good race boat then. There was nothing wrong with it. Today that would be unthinkable.
Lake had buoys running the whole length of it behind us.
There were 6 lanes.
6 lanes. and they apparently have lines here in which they reel in here at the end of the race.
Well, the course is kept straight by having those lines anchored at either end, and they're winched in and tightened at lane intervals all along the shore. So when they're positioned, they are pretty straight. It seemed to me they were straight when I was racing them.
And when they have races on rivers instead of lakes, do they also have lanes like this which are marked?
Well, if you're going to have the standard course, you'll have 6 lanes, and there's a standard width. I can't tell you what it is offhand per lane.
Wide enough to take care of those long oars.
Yeah, you have to have factors that don't vary to give room for the boat and for some errors in steering and for missed strokes and so forth. The boat's not going to go perfectly truly down the center. So they are fairly wide. I don't know what we're looking at here, about, gosh, could be all of 10 or 15 yards, doesn't it? It's like a football field width. So that makes for a very expensive course when you lay it out for 6 lanes at 1,000 meters, and we're now about 1,400 meters from the end of the lake. So these are stretched all the way down to the end. That's an awful lot of wire.
In a race, a timed race like the Head of the Charles race, the races that you've mentioned, do they have lanes marked in those too, or it's timed?
You're talking about a river race in which there's no way to get 6 lanes across and equal water, the same current or lack of current, a still water course 6 lanes wide can really only be arranged on a pond or a lake or whatever, or a dammed river. Sometimes they can hold the water back.
What about a 2-boat race like the Harvard-Yale race?
So then you get into river courses, and in a dogleg course like the one in the Thames down in London, they have figured that out geometrically so that although there are turns in the course, they don't favor one crew over another. So it works out. And then on excuse me, on head races, you have no occasion to no opportunity to run boats beside each other on courses, so you send them out at intervals and they run nose to tail. Of course, they overtake and pass, and at that point you have 2 boats. There would never be a case where there'd be 3 boats crossing or passing at the same time, one would hope. Of course, they do get bunched up a little bit, but head racing can be a little too exciting for that reason. You know, it's almost always the case that in the big head races, somebody collides with somebody else or runs into a bridge or whatever because of that. The limits of river racing. But you do have the chance then to row along a course. So you can row 3 miles or whatever. And for people who are looking for something a little more interesting than the straightaway sprint, an endurance contest like a 3-mile race, particularly on a river course, which puts a premium on good steering and good watermanship. It makes for better boat racing. It's a good added dimension to the sport. Yeah.
Do we ever have collisions?
Plenty. On the
Are
Charles,
you disqualified if you collide with another boat?
Well, what happens is the same as what happens in sailboat racing. When you get to the finish line, normally you stay in the water until your protest has been heard, and if you feel you've been interfered with, Cox or somebody in the boat puts his hand up, and when you've been acknowledged and your protest has been acknowledged, then you get off the water. You meet later with the committee and make your presentation, and they decide whether you're at fault or the other guy's at fault. And then if a disqualification comes out of it, then somebody's out of the race and you may advance and so forth. And,
does that happen very often?
Well, sure it does. It happens, I think, in every head race there's ever been. I've never been in a situation where I've either been protested or protested somebody else. But I like to, if I'm in a big boat, a 4 and an 8, I like to get the coxswain's cooperation in that respect. That is probably really more important, that we avoid collisions than that we try to pinch off somebody and get there first. Depends on how intensely the race is conducted. You have to be kind of gentlemanly if you're going to enjoy it, and so we try to give way at the buoys if we can. But it's one of those things you have to do. You know, you have to make decisions and go. And so far here, we seem to be able to get through without too many untoward events.
The people who row in Seattle, I don't know how many there are. There must be in the thousands.
Hundreds, well, yeah, hundreds anyway. Plenty of them.
Certainly in the hundreds. Do many of them own their own shells, even singles, or do they all use club shells?
The scullers probably the largest number of them, of the serious scullers, on their own boats. But
if they're going to practice every morning, that would save a lot of time.
Well, and if they want a good boat. The clubs can't offer very many race quality boats. They can offer training opportunities and practice boats, but they can't, as I said, they can't offer $4,000 boats to rank and file who want to go out and race. So in our club we're very fortunate, 5 race quality singles that people can use, and they're adapted for people of different weights. So we can boat our smallest woman and our biggest man in a race quality single. And we've only been able to do that in the last 2 years. Up to that time, why, if you wanted to race in a high quality single, you'd have to find someone else and borrow it or buy it.
How do people pay for that use of a boat? Do members get to use it free, or they pay a rental? Or?
Oh, no. If you belong to our club, Lake Washington Rowing Club, your dues entitles you to the use of any boat you're qualified to row. So we have our own methods for deciding who is qualified to row what boat, and once they have gone through that procedure, then
sign up,
prepare to race in the boat they're going to race in. So for them, at set against the cost of the yearly dues, that's a cheap ride.
Typically, what do the yearly dues run in Lake Washington Rowing Club?
Well, I think they're ridiculously low. They're $130 a year. If you row every day, that's nothing.
That's very inexpensive.
If you can row in a really high quality boat, it's terrific. So we are now offering people that opportunity. We're very happy to be able to do it.
I understand there's now some consideration being given to rowing on salt water.
Oh, well, I have friends who are doing a lot of open water rowing out here in the Sound, and they're using different boats. Some of them are using sliding seat boats, and some are fixed seat.
Do they kind of cover the boat like a kayak to some extent?
Yes, those are all decked boats, and they have higher ends, and they're a little more seaworthy. Well, much more seaworthy than any of these boats. In fact, they look more like boats. They're proper boats.
You see that becoming more and more attractive as the years go on to oarsmen?
Since it's a larger boat, which makes it safe, and having greater beam, more beam, less length, it's more manageable, almost impossible to roll out of. Not quite impossible, but with reasonable care you can be safe and comfortable in those boats and go out on the Sound where the water temperature is 43, 46 degrees year-round and too cold to live in, and you can go out there and expect to enjoy yourself and get home with some regard for the weather. So we have people out there who are becoming very good watermen and enjoying a different kind of sport. They just don't go as fast. A lot to recommend it. And it's more like perhaps the traditional rowing that one thinks of back in the days before the outboard motor. These boats that we race in are extreme. They have such a limited usefulness that you wonder anybody'd bother to buy one. And so that's the problem.
Makes it ideal for club use of the same boat by different people.
Well, flat water racing is very limited, demands a very high degree of skill, a special kind of skill, and I don't know if it's transferable to anything else. But that kind of rowing, recreational rowing on rough water rowing out there in the Sound, I think that's probably as good for the sport as simply multiplying the numbers in the race boats, because with that kind of interest people become aware of rowing a boat rather than sticking an outboard motor on the back of some awful square-sided Tupperware creation and going out and just missing the real enjoyment of being on a boat.
No objection to Tupperware, it's just you prefer boats.
Well, boats that are made out of wood are the most attractive. Boats that are made to run through the water rather than over it are more attractive. It's impossible, in my mind, to make a good-looking boat that planes. And people who buy outboard motorboats are looking for a planing hull. Now, all they do in them is
Get speed and to save fuel.
they go at very high speed to a place where they're going to sit and troll at very low speeds. So they're spending an awful lot of money for very little. They get there, then they troll. They get through trolling, fishing, then they get back at high speed and spend an awful lot of money each way in a boat that's just surpassingly ugly. Whereas if you get into a small boat, a pulling boat, it's designed to be a displacement boat and move through the water, immediately you get back to something that's beautiful, and it'll always be beautiful.
That's happened to cargo ships too since containers have come in, I think.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Were you sorry to see the wooden boats being replaced by fiberglass?
Oh, yes. Yeah, there's no joy in looking at a boat that is only an approximation of a wooden race boat. It has the same dimensions. It's smooth on the outside, has all the same equipment, but it has nothing like the beauty of a wooden boat. So, and on top, to compound it, we have carbon fiber oars, which is easily the ugliest, probably the ugliest thing that's ever happened to the sport. Those oars are so ugly, in fact, just to pick them up and tap them and to have them in your hand, it's just not the pleasurable experience.
Why do people buy them? Are they more efficient?
They're cheaper. They are cheaper. They can be made lighter. It isn't that they can be made stronger necessarily, because you still have to have a weight flexibility element in an oar. You can make it stiff, but then who can pull it? It has to yield a little, or it can't.
No good.
A human being can't handle it. Yeah.
If it's too stiff, you mean it doesn't work?
Yeah, if it's too stiff, the shock to your body is more than you can handle, so you find people rowing half a stroke. So it has to be limber, and so you can only build it to a certain strength. So all you've done is substitute one material for another, and you've gained a weight advantage of perhaps 1.5 pounds. And I think it's too silly to discuss. It doesn't improve the sport. I don't honestly believe that it's made anybody faster to row a carbon fiber oar, particularly because I watched in more than one world championship people winning with wooden oars in wooden boats, and people losing in fiberglass boats and fiberglass oars.
It just happens that the oarsman makes a big difference.
It makes all the difference. Yeah. George Pocock used to say, it's the coaches, not the horses. So, yeah, no, I've less than no enthusiasm for the modern materials, but they're here, so we're stuck with them. I went out there with the 8 today, and I was determined when we were getting ready to race to, first of all, I had to find ways to make the boat go faster, and I realized that the carbon fiber oars we were using were just too big for us. We're just not that strong. They're too long, too big, so I went back to the old standard narrow blade, which was the standard oar 20 years ago. And everybody in my boat was perfectly happy to row that oar. It was a handsome oar, and it was, I had previously shaped those oars so that they would have a lighter load than they had when they were originally built.
Do I take it from what you say that there's no limitation on the length of the oars?
No, you can make them as long as you want.
But they have to, you want them long enough to be effective, but not too long.
Well, yeah, the geometry of it gets pretty subtle because you're talking about arcs and pivot points in the water and on the lock, and it gets all kind of complicated with numbers. And it takes a bit of genius and imagination and intuition to figure out what is perhaps the exact dimension, or what are the exact dimensions of the oar that you want to use in a given piece of equipment with a given person. In my case, I had a lot of superannuated athletes who were not able to pull as they did when they were younger, so I looked for an oar that didn't demand as much. as some of these new big oars are. What happens is people are buying the new carbon fiber ore, but they're not buying oars to suit the people that are using them. They're buying oars that are made for 220-pound giants. So naturally, when they try to row them, they cut the stroke off, and they stop rowing as well as they did. And when we rowed the 8 today, 5 or 6 times during the course of the race, I came down the slide and told the coxswain, length, more length, more length, because I wanted them to hang on as long as they could. When we came in, I talked briefly to Bill Titus, and he was very enthusiastic.
In your crew?
No, he was standing
on the dock.
Standing on the dock and watched us and said that, and he watched us come in last, because we were last from scratch. But he was very enthusiastic about what he saw. He saw us rowing well.
Of course, you had a time differential, did you not, because of the age of the boat?
Well, I never did find out where we came in. I haven't been back to find out. But the point I'm making is that it was more important for me, and I hope for the other oarsmen in the boat, to be able to row it well. Not to cut the stroke off, not to have to make compromises with rowing as rowing, because we had an oar we couldn't handle, trying to get the rate up to where it would be effective. We were able to get the rate up as high as was useful. It was within the range of what I would call an effective racing rate. And we weren't paying for it by cutting the stroke off. So we were rowing complete strokes and rowing well, and we looked as if we were rowing well. And that was more important to me than to go out and thrash around with equipment that wasn't made to our measure, just because it's supposed to be fast equipment.
Do you think they'll ever give credits in rowing for style and how well you look, the way they do in ski jumping?
Well, Bill and I were talking about that, and I've talked with other members of the club in that same way, that if you really care about the sport, it becomes very important for you to see that people do it well. If you had an archery contest, for example, and you had women shooting a bow that might pull, who knows, 35 pounds, the best they could do. And you might have them up against men who are shooting 80-pound bow. You could put the men on a range in which the longest shot might be 400 or 500 yards, let's say. And they could put the arrow down there to the target. A woman couldn't shoot that far. But you'd expect to see good bowmanship in both, no matter how far they shot. Well, in rowing, it's the same thing. You go to look at the sport to see it well done. I have less than no interest in who wins the race, but I have a great deal of interest in how the race is rowed by whoever's in it.
Yes, and watching the rowing today, the symmetry and the beauty of movement of a boat is a great deal of the fun of the sport.
Well, yeah, some were pretty and some were homely, ugly, and some won and some didn't. You can't say offhand that all the handsome boats won and all the ugly boats lost, because some ugly boats
It's part of the fun of the sport when you're out there rowing, a sense of coordination that you're rowing beautifully as well as fast?
Well, it's more than that for me, because in the stroke position, I'm acutely aware of what's going on in the boat behind me, and my job is to see that everybody is able to do his work with grace and harmony and confidence. And so you give them a rate and proportion and movement that communicates itself back in the boat, so you produce that effect. And then you listen, and out of the peripheral vision, you can see the blade work, the puddles they're producing, and if the boat sounds good and the blade work is clean, and inboard there's no banging and rattling, and you don't feel the rush of bodies. In other words, a crew that's doing good work and not punishing the boat. Now that produces, for me, the best ride, and that's what I enjoy about racing. If I didn't have that to look forward to, all it would be pain, because sooner or later it gets painful.
Sooner or later you get really tired.
You can get very tired, and what sustains me is the pleasurable part of the experience, knowing that I am producing a graceful and beautiful gesture every time I go down the slide. Every time I repeat the motion, I want it to be a graceful and beautiful and efficient motion. And that's what sustains me, and it's what I remember after I get out of the boat.
Almost like ballet dancing.
Oh yeah, yeah. When I coach, all of my analogies are with dancing and with the animal world. Because in the animal world, grace is survival. All the clumsy animals are dead. And in our life, we can be clumsier than hell and still survive. So we, recognizing our own ineptitude and awkwardness, we particularly enjoy watching dancing or certain kinds of athletics. Gymnastics has been very, skating. Very exciting for people to watch, because there they see the epitome of grace, and knowing in their hearts that they will never be able to achieve that kind of grace, they can still enjoy it when it's done for them by other people, and keeps them mindful of the human possibilities. So it isn't only strength and endurance, it's just making that contact with beauty, the beauty of motion, and that makes it available to everybody. So when you have somebody coming into rowing, as I do every day, I see them coming into rowing, I sometimes question, when I can, their motivation for rowing, and then I kind of point them in the direction of grace and graceful movement, and the special quality that comes with doing it well, so that they don't get all caught up with the idea of how strenuous it is, because if they do that, I could say, I could point them to a gymnasium or a weight room and say, if you want to get exercise, or if you want to develop muscles,
pull weights and lift dumbbells.
Yeah, you can do all kinds of things that'll do that for you. But this is a very special experience, and the essence of it is that it's graceful. And I think most people who watch a boat race come away with that sense. Rhythm and grace is the first thing.
Is part of it also the thrill of getting out on water, and usually in a beautiful setting?
Well, I think that's important. We have people who row regularly out of the boat club, and one comes to mind. He'll come back from a row in the morning. He'll have gotten out early, and I'll come down and meet him as he comes back, and I'll say, well, Dave, what kind of a row did you have? And he'll say, well, I saw 2 nesting grebes, and that blue heron is back, and the ducklings are beginning to show up. That's his idea of a good row. So I know what he does.
Unlike a power boat, it's quite noiseless, so
yeah, he's noiseless. So he's out there. He can row quite well. He's a good oarsman. But I don't know that he's ever raced. He's good enough to race, but to answer your question, he's out there in the water because he likes it there. And he's in this rather pretty, quiet boat, which he can move along efficiently and gracefully, so he's doing himself a lot of good, both physically and mentally, spiritually. It's the perfect experience to start the day.
For flat water, there aren't many ways of getting out on the water to do anything, are there?
No. Well, of course, well, he could have taken a kayak or a canoe, which are more maneuverable, but he's chosen to do it in a single scull. But I think he's a great asset to the club, because for anybody else who hasn't heard him before, they might have quite different and, to me, quite sort of unsophisticated ideas about the sport. It isn't just a lot of exercise, it goes way beyond that. But it always has for me. And even though I wanted very much as a boy to be an athlete and loved to be able to prove my manhood in a boat, what made the experience for me was being in a boat that moved well, and knowing that I was a part of it, and making that boat move well. And I got pretty good at it. And
in that connection, do you get as much satisfaction out of rowing alone as with a group of 2 or 4 or 8?
Hard to say. Hard to say. I'd have to say over the years that I've probably enjoyed going out alone more than rowing in a crew, because I can deal with my own problems, with my own awkwardness and whatever, and coach myself so that after half an hour I'm rowing along quite pleasantly and I'm happy with what I'm doing. But if I row with a crew, then I'm going to have to shape that crew. So I'm working very hard to get that boat to do what I want it to do. I'm a very willful person in a boat. So I impose my will on the boat. Well, that's exhausting for me, and it's exhausting for them. So that takes away from the pure joy of the rowing in a single, that you would have in a single scull.
You mentioned earlier that you have spent a good deal of time over the years in repairing boats as well. Yeah. You get a lot of satisfaction out of that, working on an old boat and repairing it?
Yeah. The great thing about the best made boats is that they want to go back to the shape they had before they were broken. and that's why I particularly like working on a Pocock boat. All you have to do is let the wood go back to where it wants to be, and you can fair it, bring it back together, glue it up. Where the wood is broken and torn, you can replace it with inlay, and sometimes you can match the color pretty well. And when you've got it all done, you've reproduced exactly the same surface that it had before it was broken. And then there's the pleasure, which is, to me, hard to match anywhere, in my experience, of handing back to a guy a boat that he brought in all smashed, tears in his eyes. It's ready to row again, ready to race again. Looks great, just as good as new, and I think that's made my repair business a very happy experience for me.
Are the fiberglass boats also repairable?
Oh, everything's repairable. I've never seen a boat that couldn't be repaired. It's just a matter of whether it's feasible. It takes time, costs money.
You mentioned something about that the fiberglass boat tended to change its shape as it aged.
Well, it's in the nature of the resin that it cures forever. So since it cures forever, it's heat sensitive, light sensitive, and it does change its actual quality. The nature of the material changes subtly over time. So a boat that would be perfectly fair coming out of the mold when it was made, in a matter of time, years, not so many sometimes, it takes on a corrugated shape, wrinkles. It just stops being the same thing.
Apart from it changing its shape and therefore perhaps losing some of its speed, are the fiberglass boats easier to maintain than the wooden?
Well, I think people buy them with that expectation, but it's an illusion. They seem to be easier to maintain up to a point. Then they become very difficult to maintain, because it's hard to replace anything in a fiberglass boat and make it fair and make it look the same. To me, it's on the order of body and fender work. It's something I've never been very good at, and I think people who see a boat that's been repaired always suspect, no matter how careful you are, that you've added some weight to it, and so forth. In a wooden boat, I never have that feeling. You can repair a wooden boat, and it weighs virtually the same as it did before you fixed it.
Are oars very personal? Do sometimes people use their own oars even though they're using a boat that they rent? Or?
But the only thing personal in an oar is the grip. They get a feel for a certain size grip or a certain kind of handle, but otherwise they're all standard.
They have to be matched to run a particular boat.
They're matched, yeah. They're matched for length, of course, and the dimensions of the blades. Or it's all controlled, and there's really not much to choose. Nowadays, since everybody's committed to the tulip oar, the round blade, one doesn't even see choices made between one blade shape and another. Now, several of my crews went out today and rode the old standard blade in sculls and in the sweep boats. But
you've used that phrase a couple of times, a sweep boat. What do you mean by that?
Well, any of the larger boats, the 4s and the 8s, are rode with a sweep. What they call a sweep.
Are they longer?
Well, the sweep is an oar, and an oar is anything you pull with two hands under the old definition. And so we're talking about 12. The old standard that we rode for years was 12-1.
12 feet 1 inch?
12 foot 1 inch and about 6 inches wide. A little bit better, and not much. And then the blade fairly long. How long was it? 30 odd inches. But the new blade is short, maybe 27 inches long. It could be up as much as 8.5 inches wide, and that, of course, is a different blade to put in the water and to take out of the water. The wider it is, the longer it takes to get it loaded. Actually, it's going to drop through all of that width to get covered. The narrow blade gets in the water quickly, covers quickly. It's a lot easier to put in and get out. The only thing that you can argue against it is that mathematically and in terms of the subtleties of hydrodynamics and whatnot, it is not, quotation marks, as efficient. But that's only on paper. I've never been convinced to this day that anybody can row faster with a tulip oar than they can with a standard oar. because what I see is people waving their blades around, trying to get them in the water, a blade that just doesn't go into the water quickly, and I wonder why they think that they're getting the boat moving quicker that way than they would with a standard blade. Because while that blade is sinking, while that blade is dropping and being covered, you are shoving the boat backward with your legs.
When does a boat really move forward fastest?
About probably 30 degrees through the arc after you put it in the water. It slows down for the first quarter of the stroke. It slows down until it starts up again, and during that time, because you're trying to cover the blade, you're trying to get the weight on, you're trying to transfer the pivot point from the thole pin out to the blade. Until that transfer takes place and you change the lever from one class to another, during that period of time, and the blade is now moving through that arc, you are pushing the boat backwards with your legs. What you try to do is to cut down the time of that interval so that you start moving the boat forward quicker. And deft, quick, clever blade work is what gets the boat moving, so that you get the thing stuck in there before you shove with your legs too far.
Looking back over more than 40 years of racing, is there any particular race that sticks out in your mind as being perhaps the most exciting as you recall it?
Well, excitement as such, I can remember as a schoolboy losing a race. That was terribly exciting. It was traumatic, and I let go of the oar. And I couldn't get it back in my hands, and it was just sitting there in front of me, and the coxswain said, well, let's go. And I said, I can't. I was 15 years old again, and I'd failed at that time. I was just starting in rowing. I was shocked. I was astonished at what I had done. And I remember that years later, the time I quit. I never quit again. But I actually quit. I quit cold. It was unbelievable. So that was exciting. And then there have been races that were fun. I don't know whether one is more exciting than another. They're all different in that they presented different problems. There were different problems to solve in the course of the race. And some were very tidy, nearly perfect races. I rode a couple of those that were so beautifully executed that I wasn't aware of a single bad stroke or a missed call or anything in the execution that would be
That you do differently?
That I would do differently or quarrel with. I remember the last race I rode, the last sprint race out here, thinking back as I crossed the line, there are only 3 strokes in that race I didn't like, and they were the last 3.
Do you remember them that well in the course of the race?
Oh yeah, because when you're rowing as well as we were rowing then, a bad stroke would stick out in your mind. The only time...
Sort of like playing golf, you remember that
I'm
bad
sure you
shot.
do. Sure you do. Sure you do. Up.
Well, is there such a thing as a rowing hall of fame?
Yes, you know the rule.
And yeah, so you and I guess was it your Harvard crew were
Yeah, the
inducted
Harvard
into
crew.
that?
Yeah, 47 was sometime in the 70s we were inducted in.
1975 or thereabouts.
Yeah.